So thanks for joining me. I'm Dr. Baxter Bell, and I'm going to be talking and working with you a little bit today in this tutorial session on the transition from downward-facing dog pose into the high lunge pose. Now you might ask me, why bother with a whole tutorial on this particular little transition? Well, as it turns out, in America these days, the most commonly practiced Vinyasa flow sequence is the Sun Salute, the Sun Salutation, which, if you're listening in now and you've done yoga at all, you've probably done this many times. As I've been traveling around the country and teaching workshops on the therapeutic benefits of yoga over the years, I often bring Sun Salutes into my practice, and I teach those to my students, and I like to do them on my own. But what I've observed through time, and actually pretty consistently from all parts of the country, as this little transition within the midst of the Sun Salute, of being in downward dog and then having to bring one foot forward between the hands into the lunge position as we transition back to the front of our mat, is extremely difficult for many, many folks. In fact, if I had to guess, on average, I would say that only about 50% of the students that I observe can actually successfully bring that foot all the way up between their hands on the first attempt in a safe and healthy way. What do I define as a safe and healthy way? So that's a good thing to start with. So we're stepping from a down dog position, and we'll look at some demonstrations of this in just a moment, into the high lunge. And the quality of the movement should be such that the body is coordinated in its movement towards the high lunge position, that leg that's coming forward can bend deeply at the hip joint, that the knee can bend deeply, and that the foot can land softly between the hands. And a lot of times, something in that chain of events of swinging forward, bending, stepping, and placing the foot down seems to go awry. And there's certainly lots of things that could potentially cause problems. And if we have some time, we might get into some of those individual issues that can arise for you. But what I notice is that one of two things happens. Either the foot is forced much farther forward than it seems to be able to go naturally, or the foot just doesn't get very far at all, and then the person is struggling with how do they bring the other foot forward without kind of dropping all their weight into their hands and trying to get their weight back into their feet. So we're going to talk about a couple of ways that, you could call them yoga cheats, but they're little ways, little modifications that you can make in the transitioning time that might potentially bring you closer to your goal, or provide you with an alternative way of coming forward towards the front of your mat into the forward fold position that eventually brings us up and out of the Sun Salute. Let me just say that in terms of the Sun Salute, this is probably a relatively modern invention. And because of that, I feel like me as a modern practitioner, I have that opportunity to modify things so that the general experience of Sun Salute works better for my body. And I want to give you that freedom also in realizing that your teachers around the country might only have one way that they teach this to you. They might insist that that foot comes forward as far as possible each time. But I would like you to take responsibility in honoring the unique structure of your body, the unique history that you have with this body, injuries or limitations that might require that you reinvent the transition forward from the back of your mat in down dog to the front of your mat into standing forward fold. So let's just take a moment to look at the normal transition through a Sun Salute. So I'm just going to do one side. In other words, I'm going to lead with one leg into the Sun Salute and out, and show you, some possibilities of kind of the closest thing to the ideal that's often presented. Now, I'm going to mention right up front that you may notice that as I come forward, I come up onto my fingertips a little bit. And that allows me an extra couple of inches of space between the floor and my chest to bring that knee up and through into the lunge. So that alone is already, in my practice, one way that I can accommodate for some limitations that I have in the proportionality of my body and the flexibility of my hips. Right? So I'm just going to go through this one time, and I may give you some little pointers as we go through, but just as a way to visually see what the Sun Salute looks like, at least one version of the Sun Salute. And there's a lot of versions, so bear with me that this is the one that I'm going to use today for demonstration purposes. So inhaling and then exhaling into a forward bend. Now you can have the legs straight. If your fingertips don't get to the floor easily, you might bend your knees to bring the fingertips down more easily. At this point, I'm going to shift my weight and step one foot back into the high lunge. Now as I do that, I'm going to bring my hands back so they line up with my foot. And then sometimes the transition back can be equally challenging, but lifting the hips slightly, placing the hands down and dragging the foot or lifting it and coming back to down dog. So I'm not in down dog quite yet, but now as I come into the full down dog, I'm going to be thinking about how I'm going to get that foot forward. So sometimes the breath alone can be helpful. So sometimes inhaling and stepping forward on an exhalation, so I notice I come up onto my fingertips, I can get that leg up and through pretty easily for my body. It's not true for everyone. And then I'm going to step the back foot forward. I could try and straighten the legs a little bit, maybe bringing the hands onto the shins, and then coming up smoothly to finish a little mini sun salute. So obviously, in longer versions of Sun Salute, you can put back bends in the middle, and you can even bring in standing poses, as is done with the Ashtanga's primary series, in which you use Warrior One within your Sun Salutation. But today, we're just going to be focusing on that transition of the foot coming forward. So what I'd like to show you is a couple of things that I see very commonly. In fact, the one thing I see most commonly is the following. So I'm just going to come down into a down dog. And what I see people do is I see them kind of very quickly kind of thrust the foot forward, and it only gets to about here. So they don't really start by bringing the shoulders forward. They just kind of step that foot as far forward as they can, and then when they try to step the back foot to match, they can't even get their heels down, so they have to back their hands up, or they have to make a lot of other maneuvers to be able to come back up to standing. So already that's pretty frustrating. It's a little jammy to both the foot, the knee, and the ankle, and even the hip, and so it's not ideal, right? But that's what happens for a lot of folks. The other thing that they'll do is they'll get that foot to here, and then they'll kind of grab on and they'll kind of jerk it forward and set it down really hard to get it all the way to the front of their mat. Now, it is reasonable to step the foot forward and then really get things strong and very gently see if you can bring the foot forward. So that's a very reasonable kind of midpoint transition that you can make to get that foot up there and make that transition a little more smoothly. And then to step the back foot forward, sometimes they only get to here. So a couple things, you can bend your back knee and use it as a spring, and then spring forward and lean forward a little bit to swing the foot in position. If you're watching, you can usually match those feet up. So sometimes bringing the back foot forward can also be a little bit tricky. So one thing that you might decide is, you know what, no matter what I do, even swinging my shoulders forward, that foot's not going to make it up all the way. So then using the hand on that side to gently step it forward is, I strongly recommend that as an alternative to kind of jamming the foot forward and then having a hard time getting the other foot up to meet it. Another option is if you're fairly close to getting your foot forward and you don't feel like messing around with that extra step of using your hand to bring it forward, because that's an extra second or two and you might feel like you're going to fall behind, you can do a neat little trick, which is simply to match the back foot with the front foot as you step forward. And so I'll show you what I mean by that. And I'm going to step forward with my left foot this time just to alternate things. So as I step forward, I get to about here, but I don't get all the way forward. So I'm not quite at the front of my mat. So instead of like messing with this leg, you can step the back foot forward to match the front foot. Inhale, come up. And then as you exhale the hands in front of the heart, just simply step forward until you're back at the front of the mat. So then you have the full space behind you to utilize in your next time through when you go through the whole sun salutation. So again, stepping the foot forward as far as it can go. If it's pretty reasonably far forward, just step the back foot to meet it and then step back to the front of your mat as you finish up. Another option that can sometimes make a little more space. So a lot of times it's this knee to chest space that's really tight. So when you come straight through, the thigh meets the hip or the belly, and that foot just can't get any further forward, especially if your proportions are such that it's not that easy to do. So another option is to make a little extra space for that foot as it comes forward. So one of the niftiest things that I learned somewhere along the line in my practice of yoga was the use of an arm out to the side. So there is a momentum of the shoulders needing to come forward as the foot comes forward. So this kind of action. So sometimes just practicing that a few times, inhaling, and then as you exhale, and then inhale, go back. So don't even put the foot down. Just see how far you can go forward. back and forth with your breath, maybe the other side a couple times, inhaling, exhaling. You might lightly touch down. I think light is really good as opposed to jamming really hard, which can be hard on your joints. So another option is as you step forward and swing the shoulders forward like you're coming to the plank, you take the arm on the side that you're going to be going towards and you're going to lift it up and out to the side. So let me show you what that looks like. So I inhale, exhaling, I move the arm out to the side, and the foot has all this space because the chest lifts up a little bit, and there's a little channel of opportunity for that foot to come all the way forward. Do it on the second side. Inhale. On the exhale. Now, the arm goes up and out to the side. I got to bring it right back down, and then come up so that my arms are nice and even, and the chest comes back into its even position. So the arm swing to the side is a nice alternative for those of you that are having trouble getting that foot all the way forward. The foot is a nice alternative as well, so that you don't have to worry about being all the way to the front of your mat. And then considering some of your yoga poses that could actually help the hips have a better chance of coming into the high lunge, I have a couple of suggestions for you to play with. One involves a chair, and the other one involves your mat. So let me just show you how I would work with this. So anytime we can get into the deep fold of the leg a little more cleanly and deeply, it can be very helpful. So I'm just going to step back, and I'm going to step a foot up onto the chair with my legs straight, and then I'm going to bend the knee, and I'm going to lean forward. Now, my back heel's on the floor, but I can let it come up because I'm really interested in this area here, the groin area, and I'm interested in bending the knee and letting the hips come forward. So I get a lot of good stretch in my hip joint. So this kind of opening of the leg, and then if my back knee bends a lot, I really want to work with that back leg as well, because it might be that the tightness in the front of my back leg is somehow affecting my front hip. So high lunge really to a chair seat. So your hands are on the back of the chair, your foot's on the seat of the chair. And of course at home I have a couple of metal folding chairs that I got at the hardware store for about $10. And those are really great because they're super sturdy. This is it's not unsturdy, but it's got all this cushioning on it, which is unnecessary for my purposes. And then to come up, you come out and bring the foot back. And kind of notice how that feels. This is nice because you don't have to get low to the ground to do this. And sometimes it's nice to be a little more upright as you play with these little variations. And then the second side, leg comes up. Then you're going to bend your knee, come a little forward, and put your hands on the chair. As you come up, I would go ahead and let that back foot come almost into the same position it would be if you were in a high lunge. So the back leg straightens, and then come forward and through. Now at a certain point, as I bend forward, my back knee may try to bend a little bit like this. So work the back leg very cleanly and clearly to press back into the heel a little more actively. So I'm getting some action both at the front of the back leg and deep in the gluteal area of the front leg, which is great because that's all going to be important in that transition into the high lunge from the downward facing dog. And then slowly come up and back and then release. So that's one way that you can work with trying to improve your hip flexibility. The other way that you can work is by utilizing a fairly commonly taught variation, reclining variation, which is something called happy baby pose. And I'm sure some of you have done this in your regular classes, but it's particularly helpful when you're thinking about the high lunge position and kind of getting those hips open for it. So coming down onto your back, drawing your knees in, and taking your legs into happy baby. Now, obviously the knee goes out to the side when we're in happy baby, but a nice way to work this is to take the opposite leg up, you can have your arm out to the side, and try to keep that knee down so you really have this nice deep fold on the right side, and then lower the left leg slowly forward and down, so that essentially now I'm in an upside down lunge position. I'm just working the opposite way with gravity that I would if I was in regular lunge position. And I could hang out here for a number of breaths. I could focus on seeing if this area of the groin crease between my thigh and my pelvis could deepen and soften a little bit more. And if there's some chronic old tension in that area, I might be able to loosen that up and bring that into the transition from down dog to high lunge to my advantage. After you've done that side for a little while, bring the other foot up. Take the right leg up, arm out to the side. Try to keep this leg where it is. If the hips are really tight, as this leg goes down, this foot may try to follow. So you want to really keep that leg in position if possible. the heel can be off the ground, or if you're very open in the front hip of the bottom leg, you could bring that down. And then again, work for a couple rounds of breath and really encouraging the knee to come down. Try not to overpower your common sense with this left arm. So if you're getting feedback that enough is enough, there's some pain or discomfort there, then don't go any further. But see what you can find. Sometimes working for a minute, 90 seconds, 2 minutes can actually reveal a lot of opening that you might not have known you had otherwise. Another area to be mindful of is the lower back. Make sure that the lower back on both sides feels okay here. And then come back into the full happy baby pose, maybe for a breath or two, and then release the feet down. And then just as a nice treat to the front legs, take the legs out on the floor and just come into the Shavasana position for a moment, releasing those legs. So one final thought is that it may turn out that you have something going on in your body. Say you have some chronic arthritis in one hip joint, or you have a knee that is very sensitive. Maybe the anterior cruciate ligament has been repaired or it's injured, and you want to be very careful with that and not overdo the deep bend of the knee. Or there's something else going on with the ankle or the foot that just makes that step forward in some ways not a very smart thing to do for your body. In that case, I have another alternative for you, and it's a little bit odd, but I've actually worked it into one of my alternative Sun Salute sequences, and that is you bypass stepping forward completely and you actually back up from downward dog. So in other words, you're in your downward dog. Let me show you what I mean. You're in your downward dog, and your classmates, if you're in a public class, might be stepping forward and forward, but you might bend your knees and use your hands to back up to the back of your mat. And then when you come up and out, you simply walk back to the front of your mat, and you're ready for the first part of the Sun Salute with your special ending. So in summary, the transition from downward dog to high lunge, in my estimation and from my observations, is actually one of the more difficult transitions in all of the yoga practice, in all of the modern yoga practice. And my hope is that by presenting you with several options, both of how to modify how the foot comes up, how to move body parts out of the way to make more room, and how to work with the body to improve flexibility, you might be able to get closer to the goal of the foot coming forward between the hands if that's important for you. If that's not that important for you, you can then modify your transition so that it's very peaceful and gentle on the body. You're still working very diligently in your Sun Salute to really garner all the benefits that Sun Salutes bring to our body, which is a lot of great stuff like mobilizing the muscles, warming the muscles, taking the joints through certain full ranges of motion, certainly not all the ranges of motion they can do, but many of them. And so it's a nice practice to have both for your home practice and for those classes that you take out in the community. And then finally, you might decide that that particular transition is actually detrimental to the health of your body and your joints, in which case you also have the option of backing it on up. The other thing that I didn't show you so far, and I'll just mention in closing, is that you can also, from downward dog, allow your knees to lightly come down, bring a foot forward, and then come up and you're in the high lunge. So even breaking down your transition into two parts can be a very compassionate and wonderful way for you to still enjoy the full benefits of Sun Salutations, the Surya Namaskar, while making the transition between the downward dog and the high lunge a much more beneficial one for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial brought to you by YogaUOnline. I'm Dr. Baxter Bell. Have a great day.